I want to welcome people here today. My name's Jann Freed. You can call me Dr. Jann. And I created this Leadership Legacy Summit. I've interviewed more than 20 people about leadership, about legacy, about COVID, and everyone seems to have a certain expertise. And today I'm fortunate enough to interview Pam Harper and Scott Harper. And I'm going to give a brief bio, and then we're going to get into questions. And I want to invite anyone who's online to please put your questions in the chat, and we will have time to answer them. So I look forward to that. So Pam Harper is founding partner and CEO of Business Advancement Incorporated, a strategic growth advisory firm based in Glen Rock, New Jersey. She's a global expert known for helping visionary CEOs, C-suite executives, and boards cut to the heart of high-stakes strategy and organizational dynamic issues to dramatically accelerate game-changing growth. Her critically acclaimed book, Preventing Strategic Gridlock, has been used as a text in universities around the world. Pam is host of the widely praised podcast series Growth Igniters Radio, now in its 6th year. And I was very honored to be interviewed by Pam and Scott here, and so I look forward to that. And Scott is senior partner with Business Advancement, Inc. Scott helps clients reframe their innovation challenges so they can recognize new options, take full advantage of unexpected opportunities, which is definitely happening right now, create faster and more powerful decisions, and dramatically increase ROI. Scott joined BAI after an award-winning corporate career leading innovation teams for beloved brands such as Listerine and Purell. Scott is co-host of the podcast series Growth Igniters Radio. So welcome, Pam and Scott.
Oh, Jann, we're glad to be here.
Good to be speaking with you again, Jann.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. Honestly, I've learned so much through the summit, and have so much that I'm trying to process myself. So, well, we're going to have a conversation today about what you do, how COVID affects what you do, and then I'm going to get into my passion, which is legacy. So, How did you come to the idea of accelerating momentum for game-changing growth as the focus of your business? So this whole phrase, game-changing growth, I think is fascinating. So tell us about that.
Well, it is exciting, and it's actually a whole phrase. It's accelerating momentum for game-changing growth, because there are a lot of people who are doing game-changing growth, and we'll get into that. But it's actually a story. One of my passions has always been around building high-performance organizations, and I combined that with my appetite for risk-taking and personal growth, and it led me to take a whole series of newly created positions with companies of all sizes in a variety of industries, and they were all going through gut-wrenching upheaval. That's the only way to put it. And in fact, to the point where somebody hired me and said, the reason I've hired you is because you really seem to understand companies that are going nuts with growth. And of course, that's all I had been doing. As I would come in, and this was before it was common. It was back in the late 80s into the early 90s. So I date myself a bit. But the point is that it was happening back then and not as frequently. And it was due to a lot of issues of unprecedented mergers, acquisitions, new technology, changing markets. And so these companies were coming up with new ideas. And my role was to keep the organization in pace, with what was going on. And I would watch, and from the vantage point that I had, it was really interesting. I'd see these companies that were going places and they had steep growth trajectories. And then something would happen and the idea would just go, like that. And the CEOs would leave and I would go on to my next opportunity up the ladder. And I did this for a while, and it was very exciting to do it. But I decided that my best contribution was really from the outside as an external consultant. And it gave me an opportunity while I was working with companies that were going through similar kinds of issues more and more. I became curious. I wanted to understand why it was that this was happening. And so I decided to do research. And I took everything I knew. I'd interviewed thousands of people by this point, all the way through the company. And I did research. I studied. I looked at what was out there. And I read a lot of news stories, of course. And I synthesized all of this. And I realized that there was a pattern. There were patterns and themes to why this, what I was calling strategic gridlock by this time, because I live in the New York area, traffic gridlock. And I saw that there were patterns and themes to why it was occurring. And I came to call those reasons and the ways in which we would get out of it, the principles, ways of unlocking gridlock. So you could prevent strategic gridlock. And I said, well, now I understand how to transform these great strategies into something that's game changing. But I also saw at the same time that the environment was changing faster and faster and faster, and more of these things were coming up. And I started seeing that there were leaders and companies that weren't just growing in this one trajectory. They were starting to take left turns and right turns and diagonal turns, and they were growing in some new ways. They were reinventing their businesses through innovation. I became fascinated with this, and I said, it's time to bring on a partner who really understands innovation and can bring it to life faster, because I understand transformation and growth. And lo and behold, the partner was right next to me.
That's great. I love that story.
Yeah.
No, that's wonderful.
And
there's more.
There's more. There's my half, which is my history of being able to flex and adapt throughout my career. I started out my career as a scientist in academic settings. And over time, I made a jump to industry and started working for the company that makes Listerine and Purell and Neosporin and other germ-killing products. And as time goes on, I expanded my role from principally being a technical expert to leading innovation teams and groups. And I also worked with leaders on the commercial side on identifying new opportunities for serving customer needs, and in parallel, new ways to innovate business process so that we could go to market faster. And if you have a $50 million product and you can get it to market a year sooner, that's $50 million in your pocket. And so that was really important too, the speed. I became an internal consultant and occasionally went up to the C-suite, the CEO, the board of directors, to talk about dicey technical situations. Should we do this? Shouldn't we do this? And I developed a reputation. One VP said, I like talking to you because you speak geek, but you also talk my talk too.
Yes.
And I realized that as cool as it is to be a technical expert, being able to engage a large group of people who have radically different backgrounds and interests and priorities to commit to something that's a big idea, that is where the power is. And so the idea of joining with Pam and becoming a strategic leadership advisor was very appealing, and that's what I did.
So we had accelerating momentum for game-changing growth, and that's how we came to it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I honestly think both of you, what you're doing, you are ahead of your time. Because it kind of leads me to the second question that I wanted to ask is, what is at the heart of being the disruptor and not the disrupted? Honestly, if you look at we're going to talk about, COVID and all that, that is such a common word now. Everything's being disrupted. And I mean everything.
Yes.
Yep.
So, tell us about that.
Well, what's interesting is that we actually had somebody who told us, I want to be the disruptor, not the disrupted. I mean, this was a CEO of a company, so it's not just some, trite mantra, but this, people do believe it. And to us, what it is it's having the appetite to define your own path and being strategic, not having a strategic plan, but being strategic. So as the world changes, you're able to recognize the opportunities that are out there, and they're emerging all the time. And then being able to bring the new value to life in a way that's faster and better than anyone else.
And that involves bringing a wide variety of stakeholders, as I was talking about, to the mix. So they're committed to working together to make it happen faster and better than anybody else can do it. And we have an example of somebody who does this.
Yeah, share that. That'd be good.
Good. Well, we have a friend whose name is Sherry Spiro, and she is CEO of a company called Ad Magic Games and Breaking Games, which is a division of Ad Magic. And she started out years ago as a printing company doing things like promotional cups, and they got into printing playing cards for casinos and companies, and that led them to printing cards for games like Cards Against Humanity,
Exploding Kittens,
and Exploding Kittens.
Yeah, so you're talking about promotional products.
But moving over to board games.
Then she went to games, and she said, "No, I'm printing these cards for games. I love games. I love to entertain people. And you know what? I know people who develop games, so I'm going to help them publish games." And so they got into the business of publishing and promoting games and figuring out ways to finance this. One way they've used is Kickstarter campaigns, which is a different way of doing things.
Yeah.
And so she has constantly engaged her people as she's grown the company to go from, well, I print cups, to I help people create something that was never done before.
Yeah. So what's really cool about her is she was a guest on Growth Igniters Radio too. Okay. And she left us with this thought, which was that the disruptor keeps doing things their own way until they actually change an industry. Think about that.
Yeah. Wow. No, that's that's fascinating. Well, which kind of honestly leads me to the next question is, can you tell a story about how you helped a client accelerate momentum for their game-changing growth?
Okay. Well, momentum is something that you never know when it's going to go like that. And in this particular case, I was called on by the CEO, new CEO of a company that was experiencing their best year ever in some respects, but then they'd run into a changing market. And they were trying to figure out how they were going to get through this changing market. They had a very strong niche in an area. And, but they said, we're having trouble coming up with a strategy to figure this out. Can you help us? I said, yeah, sure I can. So we get together, and these people are just going at it because they all had very different views of what was going to happen. So it wasn't that they didn't know what to do, but they just had so many things that were going on. There were elephants in the room, a lot of elephants in the room. And so this went on for a bit, and it was slowing things down for this company. So there was a drag that was being created. So we took a break, and we got together. We said, okay, we visited another client that was out there, and they were going through a transition time in their company, and they were having a new leader step in, much as this company was, and everybody came back, and we all sat together, and they said, and I said, has what you've been doing been working for you? I said, no, it isn't. And I said, well, what are we going to do? And they talked about it in an open, honest way that they had not been able to do before. And so on the fourth try of putting a strategy together, they were able to quickly agree on what they were going to do. And that led to a lot of decisions that were being made. And the project came to a close. And a few years later, I met up with the CEO. And he said, that was a true turning point for us. And the company had grown sevenfold over 4 years. Yeah. So it was a very dynamic kind of situation. What it leads to is the fact that so often we think about strategy, you know, it's facts and it's figures and all of that.
This is what we're going to do.
Yeah, this is what we're going to do. And it isn't that.
Well, it is partly that.
Well, it is partly that. But it is also the ability to deal with the emotions that go with this.
Yeah, no, that's a good example. Scott, do you want to add anything to that story? Or?
Well, the emotional part is so critical because frequently people, especially at the top of a company, say, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're going to do it. It makes sense. But as Pam said before, when you're changing things, especially if you're moving in new directions, it's not comfortable. People get very good at being what they're good at. And if you want them to change, the more successful the company is, the more people are going to push back, because who wants to go out into the wilderness?
Right, exactly. No, that's very good. Well, you know, your podcast is called Growth Igniters, you know, and I will say it's a very professional podcast, very well done. And you talk about Growth Igniters leadership. Well, what is that? And can you give us an example?
It's very much along the lines of what we were just talking about, which is that whole idea that we are going to be game changers. And at the same time, it's the ability to frame and reframe. That's the only way you can do it, is to keep looking at what are we really about, and to get away from saying, well, we are a company that makes this, or we are about this. And looking at the broader frame, but at the same time realizing that in today's world, there are so many other stakeholders that are involved. And so looking not just internally, but also externally. And I know you talk about networks too. And so it's the broad range of stakeholders that comes together and works together in new ways. We're seeing so much of this right now. You were talking about COVID and all. And in this COVID time, we're seeing people do things that look like magic. Well, there's a lot that goes into that. But these are examples of what can come from Growth Igniters leadership. My concern and my hope is that we find people willing to keep doing this beyond.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Well, let's move into COVID a little bit. How has COVID affected your work or affected how you think about your work in terms of, your clients?
It's
I think your timing's perfect. So, what you're doing, I think, is really appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, the timing's been perfect, as a matter of fact. And so it's affected us in the sense that we've been looking at how many opportunities there are. For us in this case, we've decided that we are going to work totally virtually for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, we're in
that was
the
a big
New York,
change.
New Jersey area, and the risk has been quite high. So virtual. So how do we do that? And how do we engage with clients? And even more importantly, one of the big questions is, everybody's working virtually and people are saying, yeah, virtual is great and we may never go back to an office. But the fact is, people get together for a reason. Mm-hmm. And that's part of feeding this emotional bond that makes people willing to take risks and to go in new directions. And so our clients and other companies who are working virtually now and may continue for a while have to think about, how can we create stronger bonds when you're looking at a Zoom video? And I'm on my fourth hour of a Zoom video and I go, what?
In fact, we were just working with a group that was looking at, should they open up their building? How are they going to bring everybody together? Are they going to do that? How do they deal with all the stakeholders where there are different needs? And some people are not ready to go back. Some people are ready to go back. How do you reconcile those things? What are the new needs? And so these are the issues that they're now grappling with, and that's what we're helping people with.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly a need. And as I listen to, various people talk about what's going on in their organizations, some leaders are doing it well and some are not doing it well. And, I'm a big culture person. And so I think there should be a lot of attention paid to, how do we kind of rebuild this culture that's probably been fragmented. So I think you're doing very important work. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about kind of what my passion is right now, which is legacy.
Sure.
And when I just use the word legacy, what does that mean to you when you even just hear the word? And I know that it's a very broad question.
I'm going to let you answer that first.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Team. Nice to have a team. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I can open up the dictionary and say your legacy is what you leave behind.
Okay.
Right. But it's much more than just stuff, right? It is values, it's beliefs, it's culture. The whole idea of being a game changer and coming up with game-changing ideas and values in this world is always changing. One of the legacies that we want to leave is helping leaders and their organizations become better at identifying the opportunities, seeing what's out there, getting comfortable with making those changes. And they'll be leaving a legacy of the stuff that their companies do. The leaders who are leading this will also be leaving a legacy of bringing along the next generation who are going to be indoctrinated consciously or unconsciously in this idea of we can't rest on our laurels. We always have to look. What's new? What's next? How do we do this? And how do we build a strong organization that wants to be committed to doing this?
Yeah. No, it's a good answer. Yeah, Pam.
I was going to build on that and say, I think that the thing that comes to mind for me with legacy, in addition to what Scott's saying, is that somebody would say, we're better off because you've been helping us out, because you were here, like that CEO I was telling you about. And for the broader sense of people that we know, that they would say, we're better off because we knew you were here. Yeah. And I think it's so important what you talk about with the breadcrumb legacy. It's every day there's something that we've contributed that makes it better, hopefully like today.
Yes. No, that's very true. Well, I love that CEO story. Can you share another story that comes to mind related to you and legacy, or someone else maybe a client you've worked with or a CEO, or, so when I just say a story about legacy, what comes to mind?
I think, that was the one I gave you was that, but another story that comes to mind is a company that I worked with where they were going through a tremendous transformation, and they saw lots of opportunities, and they were, in fact, they were merging with another company. And I was, in this case, brought in because they said, how are we going to keep the company going? We are going to, in fact, fold this facility. We're going to close this building. Everybody is going to be out of a job, and with just a few exceptions, and everybody else is, the company is going to really be in another city. And they wanted to figure out how they were going to keep the company going for an indefinite amount of time in that facility. They didn't know when they were going to change it. when they were going to close it. And they didn't want anybody taking out anything on their clients. And
This is like 80 people, right? Yeah.
Yeah, at least 80 people. And so what we did is we put together a plan where I would work with all the people in the facility and helping them process not only what was happening to them, how it was impacting them, and letting them vent, and then taking them through, well, how are you going to be okay? How are you going to put together a new future for yourself? So what's next? And so we started out, everybody was going, oh, it's terrible, it's awful. You know, I said, okay, now what's next? And they stopped and they said, oh. And then they were open to listening. And at the end of that project, what happened was that everybody stayed for 9 more months.
Wow.
And people said that had it not been for that time where they had the opportunity to process what was happening, that it changed their games too. And so they said, I'm better off for it. And, you know, so often we think about mergers and acquisitions, people losing their jobs and how terrible it is. And these were people who said, actually, I'm going to be better off now.
Yeah, that's very important work. And it actually kind of blends into the next question. Given what's going on now with the pandemic, how do you think people might view legacy? I mean, do you think they'll view their legacy, and I'm probably talking about leaders, view their legacy different, or what legacy means during the pandemic?
I think that people are going to be thinking about legacy, for starters, in a different way. I mean, there's always been this kind of, well, I want to have a legacy and I'm a great leader and all of this. But I think more people are looking to meaning. They want to know that they've made a real difference, not just in a business sense, but in the lives of their stakeholders, not just the people inside the company, but this broader range of customers and suppliers. I hear more of that now than I ever did. And I think that we have an opportunity here as a world. If more people thought like that, and we were all looking at how do we create a better world, that it will be amazing. I see tremendous opportunities here for people to do this. The more we look at what's happening, not as, oh, that's happening, but, oh, this is happening, and this is happening, and this is happening, and how can I make the world a better place?
Oh, I love that. I love that answer. Yeah.
How can I do things differently and make a difference, long lasting? And there's also the painful fact that for some companies, they may not be able to make it because things have changed so profoundly, and companies that depend upon having their doors open and people coming in, how can they make a profit enough to last? Some may not make it. How can we transition so that people who may not have a place to come back to will be okay? And that's a legacy too.
That's true. That's very true. Well, I always like to, our time is kind of coming to an end here, and I always like to ask my interviewees, what else should I have asked that you want to share, or that you think people need to know? You know, about leadership, about legacy, about the times, about, you know, growth igniters, you know, whatever.
I think it's important for people to recognize that there is not going to be a going back to normal. The new normal is not even, you know, we're not going to even go to a new normal. We're going to keep having this series of unprecedented events. What I experienced early on, and that's happening faster and faster and faster, is going to continue to happen faster and faster and faster. And it's going to be important for all of us to not get attached to the fact of what we've lost, but to look at what's out there. What more can we bring to the world? And how can we bring other people along with us to make it happen?
Oh, I love that. Scott, closing words, closing words of wisdom?
Well, as Pam said, nothing's going to stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this change going on, and it's easy to see the big changes like COVID that smack you in the head and rock you back on your heels. But the fact is that big changes are very frequently preceded by little changes that add up. And whether it's, we've got more people moving around the world and being able to convey disease more. What do we have to do about that? And when people in organizations, whatever they are, can bring their networks together to look for the subtle signs of little changes that could be adding up and sort out the important ones from the noise, because some things are important, some aren't, some are significant, some aren't, that will be able to help people identify what's next, what's going on that we should be on top of before it hits us in the head. And that will get us on top of risks that are emerging, also on top of opportunities, so that we can change the game and it won't get changed on us unexpectedly.
Yeah. No, both of you, you're doing very important work, and I think the timing is perfect. I think I continue to be amazed I think the virus is a perfect example of how it reminds us that we're all interconnected. This whole idea of a system, well, it's a worldwide system and we are all connected, and we should all work together to create a better world. I wrote that down, Pam. I love that phrase that you use. So, well, I always like to say that my goal is to make the rest of life the best of life. And so may the rest be the best for you.
Thanks so much, Jann, and to you as well.
And I want to say thank you for anyone listening on and participating. We will be posting these interviews, and I'm honored to have Pam and Scott today. So thank you very much. Stay well.
Thank you.
Okay, you too. Bye now.
Bye.